is Donnachadh McCarthy. Donnachadh's formerly a councillor in Southwark and was also a deputy chair of the National Liberal Democrats. He is now in a slightly different occupation. He's in Occupy. And he promised he'd be here if he hadn't been arrested in the meantime. So he's here if he hadn't been arrested. I'll let Donnachadh speak about the West.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Donnachadh.
Thank you. It's nice to be here in the middle of a green surge. When Noel invited me to speak, the surge hadn't started. The last surge, of course, was 1989. I don't know if anybody here remembers the last green surge.
Yeah, 15%.
Exactly, thank you. Extraordinary. And no seats. Disgrace. But thankfully now we have PRs for European election. Anyway, up to why I'm here. I want to do two things. I want to persuade you that we don't, with my talk tonight, I want to persuade you, first of all, that we don't live in a democracy. We live in a prostitute state. And the second thing I want to do tonight is I want to challenge the London Green Party to reconsider what your purpose and what your tactics should be in the current situation that we face, both politically and environmentally. Way back in 1992, I was a classical dancer. I didn't give a damn about the environment. I was working with the Royal Opera Ballet. I was doing a swallow dive on stage from 12 foot. And my colleagues, not my friends, were supposed to catch me, and they missed. So from 12 foot, bang, I hit the floor. And to make a long story short, my therapist was going with a group of alternative practitioners to visit the Yanomami Indians in the middle of the Amazonian Venezuelan rainforest. I ended up spending some time with the Yanomami by myself there and saw firsthand the destruction of the rainforest in Brazil, Venezuela. And that was when I first became aware of what was happening to our planet, but not just happening to our planet, but happening to the people on our planet. When our civilization arrived in the Amazon basin, there was 6 million indigenous people living there. There's now less than 600,000. And that genocide continues to this day. 26 shamans were massacred recently in the Peruvian section of the Amazon basin. I came back to London pretty gutted. It changed my life. It's one of those moments where your life gets changed. And I came back and I was thinking, well, what can I do? You know, I'm a freelance classical dancer, not much money in the bank, no money in the bank. And I thought, what can I do? And spiritually, I'm a Gandhian in terms of what Gandhi said is be the change you want to see in the world. And so I always think the most important thing we can do, first of all, is actually look at what you yourself are doing. Are you contributing towards the problems in our society? Are you funding the lobbyists? Are you helping to destroy the planet in how you shop and live? So I decided that I used to shop in supermarkets in those days, and the first thing I decided to do was I decided each time I go shopping, I'd buy one thing organic. So in 1992, I bought a jar of organic ketchup. And that was my first little step to greening my lifestyle. Fast forward to today, 2015. My gas bill last year was £12. My electricity bill cancelled each other out. I sold around £50 worth of electricity and I bought around £60 worth of electricity. My water bill is around £10 in addition to the standing charge. I consume around 12 litres of mains water per day compared to the London average of 150. I haven't had a wheelie bin collection for non-recycled waste from my house since 1996. Basically I produce around half a wheelie bin of non-recycled waste a year. My neighbour allows me to put a few bags of rubbish into her bin every 3 or 4 months. What else is there? I actually import waste. I'm a net importer of waste because my house is heated with waste wood from my neighbourhood. So I import around 20 to 30 wheelie bins of waste wood a year from my neighbourhood. What else is there? So waste, electricity, gas, waste. I don't have a car, I cycle. So basically my carbon footprint is usually between a quarter to a little, maybe minus 100 kilograms just for energy between transport and my house. Why am I telling you this? Because I'm a smug Irish git. I am. But I think it's important that one actually lives the talk, and if you're actually going to come and ask people to change what they're doing, I think it's really important. It's part of my journey. And at that time, I became aware that so I started doing my own journey, but I also started the journey into my community, because it's not enough to do it by yourself. I think it's really important if we're going to change the planet. First of all, we must change ourselves, but then we must start taking that change out into our communities. And I discovered that my local park was being built up. And so the council wanted to build on Burgess Park, a large park around 150 acres, and so I ended up taking a year off work to stop the council building on that park successfully. Since in the intervening 22 years, we've had to fight 50 campaigns to stop them building on that park. Everything the council wants, they just want to put on that park. And successfully, except for one campaign, we've won every single campaign since then. Local Lib Dems asked me to join them because they also saw as an activist. I'd seen what happened to the Greens with the Green election, the European election, 15% of the vote, no seats, and I thought, well, if we're going to make change in Britain, we've got to actually change the electoral system, so I joined the Lib Dems. Around a year later, I got a letter, and it's my, when I came back, the only thing I did in terms of Indigenous rights was I joined Survival International, which is a global, based in London, a global group fighting for the rights of Indigenous people. And how they used to work was that they sent out letters to their supporters, asking them to write to some head of some government, whether it's in Mexico, Indonesia, whatever, if there's an Indigenous people under attack. And I got this letter through the post saying that the Amombe people in Indonesia had Rio Tinto Zinc were planning to move in and cut the entire mountain, the top of their local mountain off for a zinc mine. Now this mountain was, in their terms, their heaven. Just like Christianity believes, when you die, if you're good, you go to heaven. In their religion, when you died, you went up to this heaven, which is on the top of their mountain. So it was a holy mountain to them. So really very, very precious to them. And so the letter asked us to write to Suharto, who was then the dictatorial, American-backed, US-backed, UK-backed dictator in Indonesia. And something in the back of my mind, a bell rang. I was going, Rio Tinto Zinc, Rio Tinto Zinc. I actually remember that the then Lib Dem chair of the general election campaign was Lord Richard Home. And Richard Home was also the external affairs director for Rio Tinto Zinc. So I felt I would be a hypocrite writing to Suharto when, in my own party, this corruption, if you like, was existing. Now remember, at the time, the Lib Dems were anti-nuclear, pro-human rights, and pro-protecting the environment. And this company, Rio Tinto Zinc, was the world's largest producer of uranium, infamous for abusing human rights across the planet, including South Africa, and was an appalling environmental record. So I wrote to Paddy Ashdown instead and said, why is this person occupying a role that are completely contradictory? I got a letter back from Paddy a couple of weeks later, saying that he had asked Richard had assured him that Rio Tinto Zinc's environmental record is among the best in Europe. So I kind of went, I didn't accept that. So I went to all the NGOs and I put together a pack from all the NGOs of the case against Rio Tinto Zinc. And I posted it off to the federal executive members, all 30 members of them. Not a single one replied to me. And so what I did here is that they had discussed the pack I sent, and what they decided was to have a PR strategy to handle it if it came up during the general election. Hadn't got nowhere with that. I actually decided to raise it at a conference. I raised it at a Lib Dem conference. Simon Hughes was deputed to pull me aside and say they had heard I was going to raise it under question time for the party president. And I was told it wouldn't put the party in a very good light if I raised that question. And I said, well, I'm sorry, Simon. I've done everything I can internally to hold the party to account on this disgrace. And it hasn't delivered, so I feel entitled, when at conference, to raise a question that I'm concerned about as a democratic member of the party. So he wasn't able to shut me up. So I raised the question. They answered it in kind of a dismissive way. Nothing happened, but I felt I'd done my bit. On my way back to London, I was reading the Evening Standard, and there was a statement by Richard Home boasting about how conference had endorsed him. I got livid. And so I said there and then I would stand for election to Lib Dem federal executive. I put in my election address, basically standing against an RTC ticket, saying the party should be associated with such an organisation because it contradicted all of its values. Around 2 weeks later, I had a phone call from the chief executive of the Liberal Democrats saying, there's a bit of a problem with your election address, Donnachadh. I said, what's that? He said, well, you said the party shouldn't be associated with Rio Tinto Zinc. I said, yeah, it shouldn't be. And he said, well, that's libelous. And I said, are you actually trying to tell me I cannot say the party cannot be associated with an organisation that's condemned by the UN for its human rights, environmental work, and is the world's largest private nuclear producer of uranium? And he said, yeah. I said, I'm sorry, I'm not going to change my election address. He was a bit of a rebellious Irishman. And 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, I got you get a little pack of your election addresses. I opened up the pamphlet to see all the election addresses. Mine was in the middle of it. And there, in the middle of the election pack, was my election address, 2/3 of it blanked out. This is the party that's committed to freedom of expression and human rights. So I kind of was a bit shocked and horrified. And then 2 minutes later, I started laughing. Because there are liberals in the Liberal Democrats. And I knew they'd be outraged at seeing what happened. And I knew what they'd done was transfer me from a complete nobody, a minor councillor on Southern Council, to somebody who actually was a hero for free speech. And sure enough, under the Lib Dems STV system, I got elected on the last count. I got elected to be on Federal Executive. And at my very first meeting of the Federal Executive, I had a motion down asking Richard Home to make his mind up whether he was going to represent an anti-nuclear, pro-human rights, pro-environment policy, or was he going to represent the intent to sink? I didn't say he was a bad person. I just said you cannot do two roles that are completely contradictory. It's just common sense. So I can't tell you, but I came to this boardroom and it's, wood-panelled, very distinct board. I'd never met a peer, not a member MP, the leader of the Paddy Ashdown, all of it. It was quite intimidating, because I was very young and naive at the time. But I stuck to my guns. The president called me to speak, and to my motion, which was item number 3 on the agenda. And just as I was about to speak, Paddy put his hand up. I don't know if Paddy Ashdown, people know who he is? Just know, 100%. Younger people may not. Paddy Ashdown was the then leader of the Liberal Democrats. A very charismatic man, a very powerful man. And Paddy put his hand up and said, before you discuss Donnachadh's motion, I want you to understand that if the Federal Executive endorses Donnachadh's motion, I will quit as leader. That was my very first item, my very first meeting on the Federal Executive. I was on it for 7 years. I did manage to get elected deputy chair of the party 5 years later, which is a long story, a rather funny one. But what I did at the top of the party was I tried to clean it up, and I tried to address the corruption that was there. Because what I realised that I actually was very, very successful in putting through democratic motions on cleaning up the party's corruption and actually dealing with policy. But it was complete and utter waste of time. Because around the leadership was a cabal of corporate lobbyists and rich donors. And that's where the power lay in the party. And that's where the power lay in all 3 of the major, probably 4 major parties. It's the lobbyists, corporate lobbyists, and rich donors. And the third group, tax haven people. Offshore tax haven people. So I'll just give a couple of quick examples. Obviously, we all know about the corruption around the House of Lords, appointments to the House of Lords. We live in a supposed democracy where you cannot... In America, if you want to have corruption, you actually... You give 100,000 or a couple million to your senator or whatever. You buy your senator. This country, we remove the middleman. We just buy the seat in the Lords. It's funny. You laugh. The House of Lords is packed with corporate directors from oil companies, gas companies, banking companies, you name it, mining companies. And 40% of the amendments that the House of Lords pass becomes legislation. On the Budget Review Committee, just under 50% of the membership of the Budget Committee in the House of Lords are bankers. So after 12 years, the other issue I picked up on was tactical lobbying. Because when the little lab packed, I realised the real crux around what's going on at the core of the party is not just the funding, it's also the iron grip of these corporate lobbyists. And so I decided to take a tiny little thing. And I said that you cannot be a peer and a lobbyist. Lib Dems love that. Liberal, accountable, separation of powers makes sense. But I put an in the end of the motion, I said, and we will implement this motion within 2 years ourselves. That's what the Lib Dems hate. They love good, liberal, environmental policies that sound good. But when you actually ask them to do it, you ask them to do a Gandhi and be the change we want to see in the world, they hated it. And I became public enemy number one for trying to get this through. I put it to conference 13 times before I managed to get it debated. Got it debated, the parliamentary party in the Lords and Commons opposed it, won the vote by around 3%. We defeated the leadership. It then went to the federal executive. The president says we have to consider this motion. I went, what do you mean consider? You mean implement? No, we've got to consider it. So they set up a working party, which kicked it into touch. All of the membership were from the Lords, i.e. the people affected by the motion, and they refused to bring back a conclusion until we hammered and hammered, and 2 years later we forced them to come back, and they said, and this is extraordinary, they said, you cannot implement the motion because it's in their human rights and the European Convention to be corrupt. They didn't say that. But that in effect is what they said. They said to deprive these people of their income as corporate lobbyists was depriving them of their right to livelihood under the European Convention. Now remember what these people doing. They're being paid by corporations to lobby themselves. And the Liberal Democrat leadership was saying, this is their human right to do so. That is how corrupt is at the heart of the British political system. Remember, the Lib Dems are the cleanest of the three. So I went back to, they refused to implement motions, I went back to conference and said, told conference what was happening, and the president got on the platform and demanded, I was the deputy chair, my resignation from the platform at conference. Unprecedented really in British politics. The deputy chair should be has a resignation demand. I have to say, after 12 years, and I could go on and on and on about my battles with corporate lobbyists, I was burnt out. I just had it. And I quit. So I then went and spent around 7 years. I said, what can I do? Politics isn't working. So I spent around 7 years writing books about how you live a green lifestyle. I'm talking about how my house has been seen by hundreds of millions of people on TV around the world. I had a column in The Independent. I work as a consultant advising people, blah, blah, blah. So for 7 years I was trying to create a green pound, encourage people how you live green. I was kind of accepting the system. I was thinking that if we can persuade enough people to buy green, we will then have green, we accept the system that's corrupt, we'll have green lobbyists who can actually ensure that our government corruptly will do what we want it to do. And then Occupy happened. And that amazing explosion of energy that started at Wall Street spread to London, went around the world. 5,500 occupiers arrested across the planet. As a scream, I think, from the heart, that the corporate system is not only destroying the planet, but it's actually destroying social justice. And they asked me to come and speak, and I went and spoke. And I was thinking, what have I got to bring to this? And I suddenly realised that actually in adopting my green lifestyle, I'd actually removed myself from the corporate world, because I wasn't giving the corporate world my money. You know, shopping at a local community cooperative or a farmer's market, producing my own heat, so cycling rather than giving my money to oil companies, blah, 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 blah. And so that's what I talked about. But what Occupy forced me to do was to come to a full stop and look at the facts. I mean, we now know the facts from Oxfam, you know, about the transfer of wealth from the middle classes and the working classes to a tiny 0.1%. It's actually staggering, the transfer of wealth that's gone over since what they call trickle-down economics. So it was started by Reagan and Thatcher. Trickle-down economics is exactly what it is. But they forgot to tell you the second part of the sentence. Trickle-down economics is based on a flood up. There's a flood of wealth from the 99% to the 0.1%, and they give it a trickle, comes back down. So And the second thing that Occupy really was screaming about was actually the crisis on the planet. We have run out of time. The NASA, the American government, have actually said that in their view, the Antarctic ice cap is melting irreversibly already. The Antarctic ice cap is melting irreversibly already. I'm going to give you a very, obviously very sophisticated graphics and huge amounts of audio visuals. So I just want to take it one step further and say this graphic was all of life in terms of all of the animals, birds, wild birds, amphibians, you name it, on the planet when I was born. I'm 55 years old. That was all of them when I was born. In my lifetime, we have actually destroyed half. And I'm not talking about the numbers of species, I'm talking about the total numbers of wildlife on the planet has been decimated by 50%. 50% of the cake that was there when I was born is gone. If I live, let's say I live let's say I live till I'm 90, whatever, how much will be left? 10% at the rate we're going? Getting faster and faster. So Occupy forced me to stop and think, what can I do? I spent 12 years in politics, 7 years trying to be a green guru, and we've run out of time. And so I decided the best thing I could do was write about the corruption in the political system as I had experienced it from the inside. And so I started writing my book, The Prostitute State, and I started enunciating, when I was doing the research, I was going to write about the political system, about how our parties are funded by offshore millionaires, how our MPs are bought as soon as they retire as corporate lobbyists, how the core of the leaderships are actually funded by these lobbyists, etc., etc. But as I started the research, I actually kind of went, actually, it's much more comprehensive than this. That there is I developed as I was writing, there is actually 4 pillars to this prostitute state. So I've outlined the political corruption, which I could go on and on about. The second pillar in the corruption of the prostitute state is the tax haven system. When I was having all these battles over the party funding in the local Democrats, trying to clear it up, a lot of the people fighting me were members of the Lords who happened to be either running tax advisory companies in offshore or were directors of offshore companies. I thought it was just my personality. I had a personality clash. I just kept fighting these people. Lord Clement Jones, Lord Razzle, we just don't get on. I'm obviously a fiery Irishman and I rub them up the wrong way. But when the Lib Dem stuff blew up in my face and I left the party, and I kind of came out and looked above the clouds, and looked at the other 2 parties and went, oh, hang on a sec. Almost £100 million of the new Labour money, all came from tax haven associated directors and millionaires. And the Tory party's riddled. The private equity industry, 70% of it is based on one British tax haven, the Cayman Islands. And if you look at the British political system, huge amounts of it comes from the private equity people, those donors. So that's the second pillar of the prostitute state. So they fund political parties, so the political system is protecting them and not doing anything about the tax haven system. And that's that has huge consequences, because it means a huge flow of wealth out of Britain into these tax havens, which means that we have to either pay for increased taxes for the rest of us, or slash public services for the vulnerable and welfare. And you have Rupert Murdoch boasting about how he's slashing welfare in this country, and that's his policy, whilst he has all these companies based in a tax haven. Absolutely outrageous. So and the other huge consequence, of course, is in the developing world. The flood of money out of the developing countries into British tax havens is an absolute, one of the most awful dark stains on Britain's conscience. Because it's a fraction of what we give. The aid that we give, what they're all arguing about, we're giving too much aid, is a fraction of the money we steal via tax havens from these countries. Third pillar of the prostitute state is what I call the perverted academia. All the centre and centre-right think tanks don't reveal who funds them, So they produce reports on behalf of their corporate masters, it's then reported in the press as independent research, and quite significant amount of times becomes legislation. The think tanks have a direct link to legislation, and it's a corrupt link. And increasingly, not only our university research, but our professors, our schools, and our secondary schools, our primary schools are increasingly being captured by the prostitute state. My own secondary school in Peckham is run by a very rich Tory donor called Lord Harris. And that goes on. So we're perverting the well of our thinking. And that is crucial in a democracy. And the final pillar is the prostitute media. 5 billionaires, extreme right-wing billionaires. Please don't refer to the press in this country as a mainstream press. It's not mainstream. It's an extremist right-wing billionaire cabal. 5 men, and they're men, own 80% of the newspapers sold in Britain every day. And they not only own the newspapers, but they own the radio stations, they own the press agencies, they own the cinemas, they own cinema production companies, they own the book publishers. Almost everything that you listen to, that you hear or you read, in our culture and our political debate, has been affected by these 5 men. And you cannot have a democracy if 5 men who are extreme right-wingers are absolutely manipulating the debate in this country. So that's my case, that we actually have a prostitute state with 4 pillars. And, okay, it's not a very cheerful message. It's quite overwhelming. Even when I was editing my book for the 10th or 12th time, I was still getting angry. I was going, Donnachadh, you've written this book, why are you getting angry? Because it's so extraordinarily encompassing. But in the final chapter, I posited that there are 3 solutions to tackling this. We have been in this situation before. In the middle of the 19th century, with the Reform Acts, the power of the then prostitute state, which was the aristocracy, the landed gentry, was tackled by civic society. And in America, at the turn of the 20th century, the antitrust laws, when the oil companies had the American political system by the ghoulies, as they say in Ireland, they were able to tackle that as well. So we have been here before. Oligarchies and democracies are almost like a pendulum, and the pendulum has swung under the radar in Britain right into an oligarchy. And so my thesis is that there are three ways to deal with it. The first way is to individual action. If you have got Sky TV and you buy the Times, you are funding Murdoch. You're funding the lobbyists that flooded the Cameron government to try and turn Sky into a Fox News. If you're buying from EDF Energy, you are funding your electricity from EDF Energy. You are funding the lobbyists that have actually very successfully not only turned the government, the Lib Dems who are supposed to be anti-nuclear, but the entire European Union in favour of nuclear energy. If you fund, because they were the key lobbyists. They bought Gordon Brown's brother, and he was a key lobbyist in turning the Labour government in favour of nuclear energy. And of course, then the Lib Dems stood, look at Ed Davey, stood on the platform saying, oppose nuclear power. As soon as he got into power, his brother's also involved in the industry, and so is Ed Miliband's. The Labour parties, the amount of ex-ministers for energy who are work for the nuclear industry in Labour Party is just disgusting. So if you were, I could go on. So if you buy your shopping from Asda, you are funding the Walmarts, the Waltons, which is one of the richest families in the world, one of the 80 on that bus that owns half of the planet's wealth. Why are you giving your wealth to them if you're shopping at Asda? So I think that's really important. First of all, individual personal responsibility. Second step is community and community action. Working in political parties, working with NGOs, getting out there doing whatever you can in conjunction with other people, transition groups, helping your community move the money away from these corporations, some community energy companies, blah, blah, blah. But I'm afraid there is a third step that's required, and it's the one I was really nervous about writing, because being a Gandhian, I feel I cannot advocate something that I'm not willing to do myself. And what the third step is peaceful, non-violent direct action is urgently needed at a mass level, not only in London and Britain, but right across the planet, if we are going to save the planet. Political action, personal action is not enough. And so the book was published on the 1st of October, and I could not believe it. I was invited to give a talk about it at the launch of Occupy Parliament, Occupy Democracy, in Parliament Square, in around the second week of October. Russell Brand, Natalie Bennett, and myself and John MacDonald were giving the speeches. It went well. We sat down on a tarpaulin afterwards, chatting, talking about politics. I was planning to go and meet a friend afterwards for dinner. I wasn't going to join Occupy. I was just a speaker. I wasn't a member of Occupy. As we were there talking, around 6 o'clock, as it kind of got dark, we were kettled by 200 police. It is illegal to sit on a tarpaulin in Tarpaulin Square, according to the new legislation passed by the Tories in the Dems. And they just dragged us by the neck, physically, off this tarpaulin. It was really, really shocking. And so I became an accidental occupier. I felt I cannot leave now that I've seen it. I decided to spend the next 9 days there. And it was an extraordinary experience meeting the British system. You were talking about the lack of police action. To stop 60 of us occupying a square, I did freedom of information. On one particular evening, they had 509 policemen guarding the grass in case we could stand on the grass in front of our parliament and exercise free speech, saying our democracy has been corrupted. Because what Occupy Democracy is saying very simply is the same message as the book. We don't live in a democracy, we live in a corporate state. And we were protesting as pro-democracy protesters in front of the captured Westminster. On the first evening, it was illegal to have a banner there. So we had a thing saying Occupy's values is no drink and drugs on camp. Do you want that off camp? So I had a little sign of that. I was dragged by 3 policemen across the square because they were confiscating that because it was illegal to have a banner saying no drink, no drugs. The following morning I was dragged by an inspector and 4 policemen because we had a bigger sign saying our values are non-discrimination, non-violence, respect and no discrimination. We had a sign saying that, and this inspector grabbed that and that was illegal to have, and I was dragged and he ripped it to shreds. They kettled us 4 times during that week. And on the Tuesday morning, a beautiful sunny morning, 44 young people were arrested, and Jenny Jones, as you know, was arrested. And I have to confess here, I was the unnamed friend, the anonymous friend that Jenny was helping, Bernice Jones, who's at the Green Party, your only peer at the moment. And why was she helping me? Because I was standing in front of our Parliament, on the pavement, with a sign saying free speech RIP, and under my arm I had a folded ground sheet. And I was told that was illegal to have it. It's a proscribed item because it's regarded as sleeping equipment, and it's illegal to have sleeping equipment in Parliament Square. 10 o'clock in the morning, beautiful sunny sky. For me, my line had been crossed. You know, the book had prepared me to face, I knew the line was coming, and that was my line. I'm standing in front of my Parliament, I'm being peaceful, I'm expressing my human right to say, this Parliament is corrupted, and I'm standing here, I'm not giving you my plastic sheet. So I was taken to the ground by around 5 policemen. I was lifted bodily into the air. I'm a 55-year-old man. I didn't resist arrest, but I didn't give up my plastic sheet. And they lifted me into the air, and if you look in the video, there's 14,000 hits on RT, there's an RT video of it. 30 policemen in military formation carried me, escorted me to the police van, took me to Brixton Station. I was kept in solitary confinement for 7 hours. And that's how much effort they put into an old man with a piece of sign saying free speech, as opposed to actually somebody breaking the law genuinely. So my life has changed since the book got published, and I'm now a person who gets arrested. It is quite a shock. You laugh, but it's, and I can tell why you laugh. It is quite emotionally, for me, has been quite an emotional journey. It's amazing what the stuff that goes on in your head. And I've now been arrested 3 times since then. There's been 4 occupiers, I've been arrested 3 of the 4 occupiers. The second occupier was arrested for standing in front of Mandela statue. They imprisoned him with railings, and I was arrested for saying free Nelson Mandela. And I was again arrested. At the last occupier, I had a tarpaulin sign saying arrest Nick Clegg for selling stolen peerages. And I was arrested again. They're actually accusing me, which is quite worrying, they're accusing me, because I bumped into one of the wardens as he was grabbing one of the protesters, and they're saying, there's a trumped up charge of common assault. So that's quite stressful. However, so that brings me to you guys. Because I actually think there's the Green Party's in a surge. It's really exciting. It's a brilliant time to be a member of the Green Party. But even if the best things happen and you get 15% of the vote, which I would pray and love you to do, you may get only 2 seats. That means we've got to wait another 4 years before we get a tranche of 20-25 MPs. We haven't got that time. It's really important what the Green Party is doing. But there is a second role for the Green Party. And my view is that the Green Party must consider joining the protest movement and finding out where the crunch points, like Gandhi found. Gandhi found the salt that actually brought down an empire. He found that non-violent, peaceful action. And we found in Parliament Square, we found that tarpaulin was our salt. Sitting on tarpaulin got us arrested. Holding it got us arrested. But it symbolised the corruption of the state. And so therefore I just want to say 2 things, Frank. I know I'm going over time, sorry, no. It's just 2 things. I actually think it's crucial that the Green Party does 2 actions at one time. When Caroline Lucas bravely did her action in Balcombe, it got into the national press. When Jenny got arrested in Parliament Square, it got into national press. It actually says that you are people who are willing to do and put yourselves on the line for what you passionately believe in, and you know what's happening. You're here tonight because you're passionate and you know the plan's going up in smoke, and you're here because you're passionate because there's a trashing of social justice. But standing for election isn't enough at this time. Normally would be. If we were working on normal political timescales, absolutely fine. But the science is not normal at the moment. The science says we have to do something and put ourselves on the line more. And so therefore my challenge is you guys to think, what is the role of the Green Party? How can you help the direct action movement? How can you help make it really, really urgent that we actually light a flame, like Gandhi flame, and actually get change as fast as we need it? Because actually the timescale of political change is not enough. And my final thing is that when I was there during that 9 days, I was passionate that the most important of the 4 pillars of the Prostitute State is the prostituted media. Every single issue, progressive issue that we want to tackle is being vetoed by these 5 men. But the beauty of 4 pillars is that, look at that chair. If you take one leg out, the chair falls over. And so what I argued with my colleagues in Occupy, I debated, and we persuaded them that we needed to tackle the prostituted media. And what we are doing is we have actually set up a thing called Occupy Rupert Murdoch as a symbol of the 5 billionaires and the power that they have in our society. And we're doing that for a week at the end of March, because we really want the issue of the prostituted media to be core in our general election. We want people to really understand and start talking about and doing something about the manipulation of the British electorate. Rupert Murdoch should not have the right to interview our future Prime Ministers. Rupert Murdoch should not have the right to make 3 phone calls to Tony Blair and says, I will back you if you invade Iraq, and ignore those millions of people on the streets. That is wrong. And it must be tried. So we're there for a week. We would love you to come and join us. We'd love you to come and do some direct actions, Green Party branded direct actions, or etc. And go and look at the Facebook page. There's already 1,300 people interested in coming. Light a flame, and you could help us fan it. Thank you very much.
that, by the way, is the book. Have you got any copies for sale?
There's a few at the back, yeah.
Yes. Right. Could we have